Welcome back, everybody. We're diving into a thought-provoking question today, one that's been on my mind lately. Can we actually, prompt God to act?
Ooh, that's a big one right out of the gate.
Yeah, right. I know. But the sermon we're looking at today tackles it head on, and get this, uses the vine and branches analogy from John 15. You know that one, right?
Yeah, I'm familiar. But honestly, at first I was like, okay, where's this going? How does that connect to, what makes God move?
Exactly. Me too. But stick with me, folks, because this analogy takes a surprising turn toward swipe culture, of all things.
Wait, what? Now that is unexpected. Gotta admit, you've got my attention.
So, right off the bat, the speaker uses personal stories, which I found pretty refreshing for a sermon. He talks about, his marriage driving a Tesla.
Oh yeah, he even mentions getting kicked out of his mother-in-law's house.
Yeah. It's actually a pretty funny story, but it's how he gets us to this deeper idea that a lot of us see God as this, immovable, unchanging being.
And he's saying that's not the whole picture.
Right, that it actually limits how we understand God's will and how he responds to what we do. Like he's not just sitting back watching passively, right?
Absolutely. And to illustrate this, he takes us all the way back to the Old Testament, particularly to the prophets who use that image of vines a lot. He shows how God consistently reacts both positively and negatively to what his people are up to.
I found his analysis of Exodus 34 really interesting, where God reveals his will. What struck me is how it challenges this image of God being, distant.
Right.
Because in that passage, it's like God is saying, hey, I want you involved. I want you to help carry this out.
It's such a shift in perspective from this, hands off God. And that leads to another huge point the sermon dives into, the power of, praying together as a community.
It makes you think, right? How many of us are just so focused on our own individual wants and needs in prayer?
Totally. He uses the example of Solomon dedicating the temple, in 2 Chronicles. That collective energy, that unified focus literally brought God's presence down. But then he contrasts that with this image. Oh, it's kind of sad, actually. He talks about churches being turned into condos.
Yeah, it's a pretty stark image.
He's pointing out that shift, right? Moving away from a focus on spiritual needs and shared spaces. Is that connected to how we interact with God? Is it impacting our ability to, as you said, prompt him to act?
So he brings up the bronze serpent from Numbers. And I gotta be honest, this one threw me for a loop at first.
Oh, yeah, I remember that story. It's where the Israelites who got bitten by those poisonous snakes, all they had to do was look at that bronze serpent Moses put up and they'd be healed.
Right. But the way the speaker connects it to foreshadowing Christ's sacrifice, then ties it back to that vine metaphor and overcoming sin.
Oh.
It's layers upon layers of meaning.
He's definitely using those symbols and metaphors to help us grasp this connection between us and God on a much deeper level. It's like saying, hey, those ancient stories, they're not just history. They still apply today.
And this is where I thought things got really interesting. Get ready for this. He links the first sin in the Garden of Eden to modern swipe culture. Yeah. It's whoa, hold on a minute. How did we get here?
I know, right? It seems like such a jump. But his point is that this constant swiping, whether on dating apps, social media, even just how we approach decisions, it reflects how much we value having options.
Over actually making a choice.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And he's suggesting that's not real freedom. Instead of committing to something, really digging in to grow and bear fruit, going back to the vine, right?
Right.
We're stuck in this endless loop of swiping.
So we're always keeping our options open, but maybe missing out on something more substantial, something with depth.
Right. Think about it. How might this swipe culture mentality be affecting our relationships, our work, even our faith? What are we missing out on by never fully committing? What really stuck out to you about this part?
The ending, for sure. He ends with this really emotional call to action. He's urging us to choose real freedom, but not the kind we usually think of. He's saying it's about accepting Christ and surrendering to God's plan, which, that can be a tough pill to swallow for some folks. But it's the path to real fulfillment, he says. I don't know about you, but that got me thinking.
It's definitely a challenging message, but it's not just about individual surrender. Remember his earlier points. When we tie it all together, it becomes about acting together, about becoming this force for good in the world that God can then respond to.
It's almost like he's saying that by aligning ourselves with God's will, we tap into a power that's way bigger than ourselves.
Yeah.
And it affects not just our own lives, but the world around us.
Exactly. He's not advocating for sitting back and praying passively. It's about getting involved, Stepping outside our comfort zones and truly committing to building something better.
Something that reflects God's love and justice.
Now that's a deep dive worth taking. It really makes you wonder, like, what does stepping outside of those individual wants and needs really even look like?
I know, right? It's so easy to get caught up in our own little world, our wants, our problems. But what if we, zoom out a bit?
Right. What if we think about those around us, our community, our city, the world even?
The speaker made this really interesting point about how when he finally surrendered to God, things actually got harder.
Oh, yeah, he talks about that.
But he wasn't saying it was God, punishing him or something.
No, it was more like the real work could begin.
Yeah. Now you're committed. Now I could equip you to really face those obstacles, those giants in your path to your purpose.
And those giants, they might not be what we expect, It's not always some, huge dragon to slay.
Sometimes it's our own fears, our insecurities, our doubts.
Sometimes it's the injustices we see all around us, the inequality, it's the suffering. And to face those giants, well, it takes a different approach.
We need compassion, we need courage, and I think we need to work together.
Exactly. We can't slay those giants alone. That's where I think that idea of collective action, collective prayer even, it really comes in.
Praying for each other's breakthroughs, not just our own. Looking for ways to use our skills and talents to serve others.
It's like, instead of focusing on what we don't have, what if we look for ways to use what we do have?
There's power in that. The speaker even challenged us to look at how we use theology sometimes. Are we using it as a shield to stay comfy and avoid action?
Ooh, that's a good one.
I mean, have we gotten so comfortable with God being unchanging that we've become immobile?
Like we've forgotten God can move and respond to us too, right?
He interacts with us based on our choices, our willingness to be a part of his plan. That's where this whole prompting God thing comes back in, I think.
Yeah, and he was clear. It's not about manipulating God or trying to make him do what we want.
It's about aligning ourselves with his will, being so in tune with him that what we want becomes what he wants.
And then what we do is like an extension of his action in the world.
It's kind of mind-blowing when you think about it. We're not just passive recipients of God's blessings, right?
We have a role to play, something to contribute.
Yeah, we're not just along for the ride.
And we don't have to figure it all out on our own either.
Right. We've got the Holy Spirit to guide us, nudge us, and we've got each other.
And of course the Bible. It's a roadmap, a guidebook.
So it's not about knowing all the answers. It's about having the courage to ask the questions and to take a step of faith, even when we're not sure where we're going.
Yeah, and to trust that God is with us every step of the way. There was another point he made that I kept thinking about afterward. Being a platform rather than a cap, especially for those in leadership.
Ooh, I love that analogy.
It's about empowering others to reach their potential, right? Not limiting them.
Creating space for others to shine, to use their gifts.
Because ultimately it's about serving others. And that's a reflection of God, isn't it?
He's not building a kingdom at the expense of others. Everyone has a place. Everyone can flourish.
That's a world worth fighting for, worth sacrificing for.
Worth surrendering our own will for even.
Because when we do that, when we surrender to God, it's not about losing control.
We're gaining true freedom. Freedom from our own selfish desires and limitations.
The speaker really challenged us to think about how we use our free will, how we often choose the freedom to choose over true freedom.
I mean, he uses that example of swipe culture, but I think it goes way beyond dating apps, right? It's this constant need for instant gratification, this FOMO, this fear of missing out.
And this inability to commit because we're always searching for something better, something more.
And it seeps into everything. How we approach relationships, work, shopping, everything.
We're always looking for that next dopamine hit.
So we miss out on the depth and beauty of truly experiencing life. Building those deep relationships, committing to something bigger than ourselves.
Like we're so terrified of making the wrong choice that we don't make any choice at all.
Which is in itself a choice, right? One that keeps us stuck, keeps us from our potential.
Exactly. But the speaker offered a different path, a path of true freedom through surrender.
And it's not a surrender out of weakness. It's a surrender of strength, of trust.
Surrendering to God, not because he's controlling, but because he knows us better than we know ourselves.
It can be scary, for sure. Letting go of our plans and desires, our own timelines.
But what if in letting go we actually gain so much more? What if that's how we find real purpose, a purpose so much bigger than anything we could have imagined?
I love that saying, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. It's not about what we can do. It's about saying yes, trusting, following, even when it's hard.
Yeah, it's on the adventure starts.
Yeah, that's where the growth is.
He challenged us to be contact points for God's power in the world, conduits of his love and grace.
I love that image. Like we're bringing heaven to earth, light to the dark places.
We don't have to be perfect or have it all figured out. It's about willingness, availability,
Openness.
recognizing that we're all broken. We all mess up.
But God can use those broken places. He picks us up, puts us back together.
It's like kintsugi.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
It's a reminder that we're not disqualified from God's love.
Yeah.
And our brokenness, it can actually make us more effective. It's in those places where we're vulnerable, where we see our common humanity, and we connect on a deeper level.
He reminded us we're not alone in this either. We have God. We have each other. We have the power of prayer.
The question isn't whether God hears us. It's whether we're listening to him, paying attention,
It's about stepping out of those comfort zones, right?
taking risks, making a difference.
He wants us to stop limiting God, to believe in his boundless love.
To rise above the superficiality of swipe culture and embrace a life of meaning, of purpose.
To be active in his kingdom, bringing light to the world.
He didn't shy away from the hard stuff either. The things we struggle with, mental illness, violence, injustice.
But he didn't leave us in a place of hopelessness.
It was like he was saying, yes, things are messed up, but don't give up. Don't lose heart. There's still good to be found.
And that good starts with us. Our choices, our actions.
We're not just victims of our circumstances. We're victors.
We can overcome.
That's a powerful message. It can transform us.
From passive observers into agents of change.
Of God's love and grace. He also challenged us to think about the legacy we're leaving.
Ooh, yeah. What are we doing that will outlast us? What mark are we making on the world?
It can feel overwhelming, but also exciting. Like we can dream bigger, leave a legacy of love, of kindness, of making the world better.
It's about inspiring others to follow, you know, to carry the torch.
He really drove home that power of unity, too, of working together.
Reminded us that we can accomplish so much more together than we can alone.
We need each other. We're better together.
It's about creating that sense of belonging, that shared purpose.
He talked about creating a home.
And he didn't mean just a physical building. It's a culture, an environment.
Where people feel safe and loved and accepted.
Where people can be vulnerable, be real.
Find support and encouragement.
It's a community that reflects God's heart.
He painted this beautiful image of the church being a beacon of hope, a place of healing, a place where hurting people can find wholeness.
And it's not just about physical needs, it's emotional and spiritual needs too, right?
Offering a message of hope, of forgiveness.
Creating a space to experience God's love in a powerful way.
He challenged us to not just hear God's word, but to be doers of it.
Put our faith into action.
Be the hands and feet of Jesus.
Live out what we believe.
Make a difference.
It's a good reminder that true faith isn't passive.
And that brings us back to that idea of prompting God. His will isn't some, mystery. He wants to work with us, not just for us.
He even said that our actions can sometimes be what prompt God to move.
Remember that Red Sea moment? God didn't part the waters until Moses stretched out his staff.
It was an act of faith.
So how can we be those staff-stretching people? What are we seeing in our own lives that need God's attention? What bold action can we take?
He ended with this powerful question. Are we so focused on what we don't have yet that we're missing all the incredible things he's already prepared for us to do?
That's such a good question to ponder. It's about shifting our perspective.
From what about me to how can I be a part of this?
It's about being a part of God's work in the world.
Becoming more than just consumers of faith.
We can be co-creators with him, bringing light to the world.
That's a powerful message. It's a call to step into something more.
It starts with that choice, to surrender, to embrace his purpose, to step into the adventure.
Knowing he'll guide us.
Think about what it means for you to be a prompt for God's action. What small act of faith are you being called to? What difference can you make today?
Because sometimes that smallest seed of faith can grow into something amazing. It's a good question, isn't it? What legacy are we leaving? I mean, it's not just about stuff, right? It makes you think bigger.
It does. He really emphasized the power of unity, like coming together as a force for good.
He was saying that we're stronger together, that we can accomplish more when we combine what we have, our resources, talents, passions.
Working towards a common goal.
We're not meant to go through life alone, We need each other. We really are better together.
He kept talking about creating a home.
Not just a building, but a culture. A community.
where people feel safe and loved and accepted for who they are
Where they can be vulnerable and real.
and find that support.
Yeah, it's a community that reflects God's heart. Welcoming, inclusive, compassionate.
He painted such a vivid picture of the church as this beacon of hope, a place of healing.
It's not just about meeting people's physical needs either.
It's about spiritual and emotional needs, too, offering a message of hope, forgiveness, transformation,
A space where people can experience God's love in a powerful, personal way.
and the freedom and healing that comes with that.
Right.
He challenged us to not just hear God's word, but to be doers of it,
To put it into action, live out those beliefs.
to actually be the hands and feet of Jesus,
To make a real difference in the world.
because true faith isn't passive.
And that brings us back to this idea of prompting God. His will isn't some big mystery.
He actually wants us to be a part of it.
And sometimes our actions, our obedience can be what prompts God to move.
Think about the Red Sea. God didn't part those waters until Moses took action.
Stretched out that staff.
It was an act of faith.
Exactly. So what are we doing in our own lives? What needs God's attention? What bold action can we take?
Are we so focused on what we don't have that we're missing what God's already prepared for us? That's a good question.
It's a good one to think about, shifting that perspective a little.
It's about moving away from what about me and more toward how can I be a part of this?
It's about understanding that true fulfillment. It comes from living a life of purpose, of service.
Of being a part of something bigger than ourselves.
So as we wrap up today, think about what it means to be a prompt for God. What small act of faith are you being called to? What difference can you make today, right now?
Because even the smallest seed of faith planted in the right place can grow into something truly incredible. And on that note, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. We'll see you next time.